So our vocal chain usually, again, it sort of depends on singer and mic, but a sort of standard thing where we have a little Neve 1073 preamp, and then it'll go into one channel of the 21176. Not really doing very much actually, more just for it feels nice going through that box, and but it won't be knocking much off. Then into the Mandy channel of the Mandy, and that's a really nice kind of broad strokes EQ. Just probably boost a bit of air, maybe cut out. If a singer's particularly sort of honky or whatever, just cut a little bit out, but not doing anything particularly drastic. And then the tube tech sort of does the heavy lifting, so to speak. So that's doing the lion's share of the compression, and the makeup gain on that's really clean as well. And then that's going back in through the Crane Song converters back into Pro Tools. So that's a pretty sort of standard vocal chain for us. We're also using an analog outboard chain on our 2-bus. So we'll come out of Pro Tools, we'll go into either the Avalon or the Massive Passive, depending on what type of track it is. The Avalon mainly for pop stuff, and then into the Roll Super Stereo compressor there before it hits the Crane Song again, and then back into some usually like the Sonnox Inflator, doing our mix bus start here setting. So it's not doing very much, but just a little bit of I don't even really know what the inflator does, but we like what it does. It makes everything more present, and it's a way of squeezing a bit of extra volume out without losing dynamics. Then we've got a little bit of mid-side processing and the Oxford limiter to top it all off. So that is a pretty standard master chain for us, and it's a pretty standard session. I think the enhance function on the limiter is absolutely brilliant, because everybody wants it loud, and particularly this is something that I think affects writer producers more than it does mix engineers per se. Is that if we were just mixing a track and we weren't that worried about it sounding good and impressive in an A&R meeting, we would process our master chain very differently, I think, because we'd know that it was going to a mastering engineer, and we'd let him do all the fine tuning. But the trouble is, if our track doesn't punch out in an A&R meeting, then the song's less likely to get cut. So we actually would go quite hard with the limiting and the mid-side processing, the inflator, anything that we can do just to give it that edge. And it might be anathema, to do that, because you're contributing to the problems of the loudness wars. But if you're in the game, you got to win the game. You can't be complaining about the rules. So we've got a session here, a song called Honest, that we wrote and produced with the Lovable Rogues. We're just going to have a look at the plug-in chain on the lead vocal, and in particular how we use suppressor.
We knew Tay's voice, so we kind of this wasn't all guesswork. We kind of knew his voice from working with him a lot. So this was the sort of end chain that we ended up with to make his vocal sound as nice as we thought it could sound.
So this is the vocal on its own.
And I told you my roots will keep me honest. I'll be a good boy, that I promise.
It sounds pretty nice, and like we were saying earlier, we commit quite a lot of compression and a small amount of EQ as we're recording it. But Tay's got this characteristic in his voice where he can, particularly when he's belting the notes, he can sound a little bit nasal sometimes. And so instead of using suppressor as a de-esser, we're actually using it to just compress that nasal quality. So I'll bring it in here.
And I told you my roots will keep me honest.
We're not doing
a good boy,
a huge amount. It's sort of between 3 and 5 decibels worth of.
Solo the frequency just to
yeah,
show
but
him.
Seeing the frequency. This is one of the things I love about the suppressor, the flexibility of hearing what's going on. So that's the frequency we're trying to get rid of, this nasal frequency, and if you bypass,
I'll be a good boy, that I promise.
It's quite subtle, but I think the effect it makes the vocal actually feel a little bit warmer. even though you're not really touching the low end. And so that's a way of using the suppressor to affect the vocal, even though you're not using it as a de-esser. We're also using it as a de-esser. Here we've got the S. Got another instance of it, of the plugin. Just doing these S's. Again, just not doing all that much. It's just keeping everything nice and in check. So that's the suppressor. And then here we've got the Sonnox EQ. Usually we'd be using the GML. For some reason we've gone for the Type 3 here, I think just because it's got a nice wide musical cue. We're just pulling out a bit of the 200 and filtering it off a lot. The reason for doing this is we've got stacks of his vocal here. We've got a load of left-right dubs, and we've got harmonies from Eddie and Sonny, and so the lead vocal actually needs to be quite thin in the chorus.
Also, this vocal was recorded in our old studio, and the soundproofing wasn't as good as it is here.
That's true. Yeah, I forgot about
that. So
that.
if we didn't have that on, I don't know if it worked, but if you didn't have it on, you might hear a bit more of the bleed, or there was just.
It's not bad actually.
There used to be like if a car came by, we'd hear it through the mics, or if the cleaners were in and they were hoovering down the stairs, it was a complete nightmare. So it was good to just to be safe and sorry and knock it all out.
That's true. And then just to crown it all off, we've got the Oxford Limiter.
Good boy, that I promise.
And
if I said that, I won't leave then.
It doesn't look like that's actually compressing at all here. We've got that set basically so it doesn't compress. The reason that we put a limiter at the end of the vocal chain is just to tame any peaks, and we'll just be knocking off the peaks at absolutely tiny amount. And it's just to keep it all, again, really important for pop stuff. I don't think it's applicable in other styles particularly, but the vocal needs to be up front at all time, kind of radio style. So we just make sure that that's happening, and we're not doing any in-the-box compression. That's kind of happened outside.
Take them all off and put them all back on.
So that would be I guess a typical vocal chain.
Good boy, that I promise. If I said that I won't leave, then I'll stay true. 'Cause I told you my roots will
Obviously, you're getting a big jump in level there from the limiter, but I think the overall effect is it just gives you that sort of shiny pop sound that we were going for, and the plugins are so precise and hi-fi that the chains of them you don't hear them, even though it looks like you're being quite heavy-handed with the end result is very transparent and natural, and that's what you're after. I really like things where there are some plugins where only that plugin does it, and we won't hesitate to shell out money on plugins like that. Things like the inflator, like I can't think of another plugin that does what that does. It really in the same way. I mean, there are plugins that sort of try, but that's a standalone plugin, and we use that all the time. And I can remember we saw something online and we were listening to the difference. It was a vocal thing. It was probably a Sonnox video, and we were like, "Wow, that sounds really good with the inflator on. We've got to get that." And then you get addicted to it. You can, pretty much it's on everything now as well. Firstly, I love the way the enhance function works. So we're not using it in this particular context because there isn't that much transient on the lead vocal. But if you're using it on a drum bus, say, or even across a whole mix, with a lot of other limiters, you're losing a lot of the transients as they get shaved off by the limiter. And I don't know how. It's some kind of witchcraft that goes on in the software. But this enhance function seems to give you back that transient. So when you're using it on a drum bus, would be a great example. You're not losing the sort of crack of the snare, or that initial attack, and that's really useful.
It's quite transparent on the vocal as well. You don't really hear it. It just seems to even without enhance, it just does that. It enhances the vocal and just brings it up and makes it rounder and nicer.
I think that's something else that other limiters seem to do. Other limiters seem to tamper with the low end a little bit. You can hear like distortion artifacts on the low end, particularly if you're being quite heavy-handed with the limiting, or else you seem to get a sort of build-up, like a woolliness that can be quite unpleasant, particularly on something like a vocal or the whole mix as well. And the Sonnox seems to leave the low end intact, which is, that's a great thing to have, a limiter that just makes things appear to be louder rather than introducing any unwanted artifacts. It's really useful. If I could only have one plugin, it would be the Sonnox EQ.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Because I reckon
it's on everything. It literally goes on pretty much everything.
We could make a record with just the Sonnox EQ and front end, and it would still sound pretty good. It might be a quite dry record and not have many effects, but it would sound great, and it goes on everything.
Since we've been working together, that stood the test of time, because it was something we used from day one when we first started, and it's something we still use every day today.
Well, in terms of the sound quality, I think that the sound quality, if I was going to use words to describe it, it's things like precision, clarity, fidelity, that kind of thing. I think the plugins are of the...
It sounds very expensive.
Yeah, it sounds expensive. They're like top quality plugins. One of the things I think actually makes a difference with plugin manufacturers is the sort of company ethos. I know that sounds a bit funny, but like when I can remember I had an iLock issue or something with a Sonnox plugin, and I had a real person email me back and really genuinely helpful about it. And I think that it's nice dealing with people who are passionate about what they do and want to get you sorted. And
it feels a little bit, as far as the service, it feels a little bit boutique, which is nice, because it's not, you don't feel like you're getting lost in a load of numbers that are it's all out for sales.